Okay, I think we are running on the show. Let us get our little advert, our opening logo running off clickety-clack. Analog devices, don't they make wonderful sounds? Typewriters, QWERTY, analog clocks, and the logo for Troubles in Paradise website, wordpress.com. Older material, but all freebie. Everybody can share and share alike. It's a delightful amount of stuff. Well, here we are on the 3rd of February in the year of doom under Trump 2.0 and looking forward to what's going to happen in the stock market tomorrow when they open up, given all of the tariff craziness and stuff. But politics, hello, Slade. Politics is not quite what we're dealing with, as you know. We are continuing week by week, episode by episode, to investigate the blather that is Sarfati and Tay's Titans Dinosaurs book. And we are now to take wing in the wonderful world of pterosaurs. Hello, Lisa. And this, of course, is our little bi-weekly foray into Casey Luskin. And this one is one that I was particularly delighted with because I sort of stumbled into it from the back door when I was finding out a bunch of technical papers, and it brought up a topic, and I began to wonder, gosh, I wonder if any of it's on the Luskin list, and it turned out to their peril, actually, yes. So we'll be getting into that in a bit. So first off, the exciting world of pterosaurs. For those of you not up on non-bat, non-bird flying vertebrates. These are your classic batwing style pterosaurs that can be small, the size of a crow type. Earliest ones, in fact, the Rhamphorhynchids, I think that's how I'm pronouncing them, are quite small. They're appearing in like a Triassic. How did they know pteros aren't dinosaurs? Right. Oh, yeah, that's another matter. It's because of their internal anatomy. So they are not full-blown. Dapper Dino could probably rattle off in great detail exactly the systematics, but they're more over in that archosaur, crocodilian classification zone rather than a branch of dinosaurs. They're also appearing quite early in the Triassic, which is really ahead of when the dinosaurs are getting their little leg up in the late Triassic. So they're early elements on the field. Being that they're very small and very lightweight, they're hard to fossilize. It's no coincidence that a huge number of the fossils that are found in a relatively good state of preservation, are because they have been caught in Lagerstätten contexts where the bodies haven't broken down. And so, Solnhofen and things like that, that kind of conditions are where you find these things. Otherwise, you can have little bits and pieces of things, a segment of a bone. If later on, as you move into the great big Pteranodon and Quetzalcoatlosaurus type things in the Cretaceous with these monstrously large Cessna plane-sized critters that may or may not have flown all that much. They were probably land predators. That's a sidebar issue that's rather fascinating. Those you could theoretically have bits and pieces of like their crests and that you have. In fact, one of the papers that unfortunately we won't be able to find on a freebie, I was able to download the full paper, but maybe various people will be able to find these things. I would have loved to put a list up on this from Kellner in 2003 work, like bog bodies, yes, that they were breaking down in great detail the phylogeny of the various skull shapes in groups. These are the smaller size ones, and then you start getting all of these weird things. The one with the kind of frill that you can see up in whoopsie, there we go, about here, are one of these that's kind of a filter feeder type. They have very long, narrow skulls. And then also, I think, a breakdown about, kind of hard to see all the little fiddly bits, but there's even differentiation in the finger structure and the like between the wings, although superficially they look very similar between the smaller groups and the larger groups over time. The interesting bit is that our creationists are diving into them only in Gee Whiz mode. So they're citing an older work from Whitmer et al. 2003 that I'll be able to put out on the flying reptiles in general. And suddenly realize I have a little typo on my little script in here. And as we try to flit around, I want to get that corrected. There we go. We don't have to worry about it. And then one more recent one by Nesh et al. 2021, which is about the potential flight characteristics of hatchling pterosaurs and how they were dealing with all of that stuff. Oh, ancient RNA, Egyptian DNA relatives from the answers in Genesis. Oh, yeah, that's in it. Although, remember, even creationist sources can be really handy as an avenue into their mindset. So the one disadvantage from the videos is they, for all practical purposes, are not particularly prone to offer the source material. Probably the material that they will be bumping off of will be on their AIG website in one article or another by somebody or other. They tend to have a tight match between what appears on the videos and what they do on the others. Hello, Purple. And so that can be a handy thing. The same thing you find with ICR. AIG, of course, does a lot more in the video department. They'll involve Bodie Hodge and Georgia Purdom and others, but there's a fairly tight match between the material that gets posted at AIG on the website versus virtually all the shows, in fact, will have direct counterparts where they'll have that material up, and they'll have about the same date as the video version. So there, at least, I've alluded to them occasionally on the show, is where I will be alluding to the fact that the thing originally was like a video show. Joel Duff is often riffing off of the video material. I'm a text guy, and so I want to see the material that's got the source references, if any, to find out what they're bringing up and whatnot. So the Egyptian DNA, in fact, it wouldn't at all surprise me that we might be alluding to that in Rocks Were There Volume 2, because I think there is some allusions to how the creationists are trying to wriggle around like the datings of Egyptian mummies and a few things like that. So I'd have to see the actual title of the original article, but we may be alluding to that in Rocks Volume 2, because that material of how you date the Egyptians, how you deal with the things, for another bit about of Egyptian mummies, relates to the microorganisms and diseases that are shown in there, which again goes back to the whole notion about how perfect the creation was, and the genotypes of things as to the actual distribution of how human beings were living back in the Bronze and the Copper Age versus the cartoon of everything scrunched down into the post-flood era. So those things can inadvertently be fantastically useful stuff. But back to pterosaurs. So the thing that you will not see in Sarfati and Tay, and for that matter in the creationists generally, is how many kinds are involved. They could, I suppose, just argue that all the pterosaur families are just boop, all one kind or not, as the case may be. But and they should theoretically have to do that by virtue of the fact that they are critters like birds and others that would have to have been on the ark. They can get around marine creatures and insects, but they can't get around flappy things. Needless to say, of course, there were no mentions of pterodactyls and the like in the Bible. They were aware of bats and birds, kind of. But that's about it. The critters that they would know about by directly. There is a creationist lore, which we will also be discussing in Volume 2 of Rocks, about the little niche bunch of admittedly flakier creationists, although it bumps in at the edges of the Bodie Hodge world, that pterosaurs were living down into modern times. Dwayne Gish played around with this a little bit, drawing off of a hilarious bit from the Tombstone Epitaph, and we'll be going into all the little skivvy about what that actually involved and how this was so blatantly not a real thing, and yet Gish was riffing off of it. And then there's a little small bit in the Photoshop era of people who are trying to argue that there were pterosaurs that were shot down during the Civil War. That's all just Photoshop fakery. So it's an interesting little sidebar of the material they brought up. And there's also a wacky creationist. I think he may have died during COVID recently because I think he's dropped off the map. Peterson, something like that. There's been several videos and the various critics have done over the years, but he was hoping to capture a living pterosaur, and he was trying to get GoFundMe kinds of things to finance all of that. Needless to say, that one is not one that actually panned out. Tings were also creatures who didn't walk on all fours. Doesn't that confuse their kinds? Yeah. That it's an interesting little tidbit about there was a tiny little debate. Whoops. Where are we? I'm hitting the thing. How can we get around the marine animals, salt and freshwater? The salt and freshwater thing. The creationists just flipped that off by saying, well, there are some fish that can handle various salinity, and as if that resolves the matter. But there are all sorts of marine creatures that have very narrow salinity ranges, either freshwater or saltwater. And since the creationists also aren't getting into close detail about what the salinity of the big floodwaters were, but remember, they've got way bigger fish to fry, literally, in the fact that the heat problem would boil off the oceans. And so, the biggest fish fry in history, as well as toasting Noah's Ark. But that's more little material that we'll be alluding to along the way. Anyhow, the interesting bit is the absence of any baraminology stuff in the book on pterosaurs. They don't have anybody to cite. It's not a big thing for creationists to ponder too much about. The farther you get out from barnyard animals, horses and cows and dogs and cats and all of that, the more uncomfortable creationists are. And you'll have a tiny niche of half a dozen people who will kind of tunnel vision in on a particular topic. So you get one person that'll be kind of fascinated a little bit with dinosaurs and a little bit with therapsids and the like, but not much on it. Degradation from the pure ancestral baramins. That's kind of about it. You've got theoretically the created heterozygosity thing from a genetic element. The idea that there was intense polyploidy maybe in Adam and Eve, but it never gets to the point of detailing what the Adamic genome would have involved and how many ALUs were they having and all that stuff, because they would instantly bog down in the details. And even the ones who have some professional training in the area, Jensen, Sanford, and Tompkins and the like, they've never ventured anything on that front, and I would predict that they never will, because it's going to be quite impossible to shuffle the data field around in such a way that they would ever come up with something plausible. Jensen, of course, as I've mentioned in previous shows, and Danster and Cardinale has done some beautiful analysis on that, to where the compressed Jensonian frame is requiring haplotypes and the like that are preposterously recent, that go back to the Neolithic, but somehow when they compress everything, they've got them popping up in like the Middle Ages, which is just wrong. We know that's wrong. We've got the actual archaeological evidence that we can trace it back to the Neolithic, which even by their own arguments, it isn't modern times. So anyway, that's all the little fun bar on it. So regarding the pterosaurs, we would never get any differentiation between these very small rhamphorhynchids, the crow-sized ones, often with a fairly long tail, versus the mutations into the bigger pterosaurs, the giant glider forms that are dominating the Cretaceous. That probably the smaller forms are fading away because they are now having competition from birds by that time. So a lot of the ecological niches are probably being dominated by them. And we still have the little $64,000 question as to whether or not bats were even originating in the late Cretaceous or not. The genetic information would be consistent with that, but the earliest fossils we have date from about 10 million years after the mass extinction. So we don't know, and they're already fairly well-developed bats. So we don't know how do they explain Neanderthals and humans being separate species? Well, here's where we get into the fun part, and this also will be going into a gruesome detail on it in the volume 2 of Rocks Were There. You've got to divide between most all doctrinal creationists Indeed, Nepicross. They argue that Neanderthals were in fact human beings, maybe weirdly degenerate ones, just strangely mutant ones, which was a position that was riffing off of older science material that for briefly there was a move among a few paleoanthropologists to lump Neanderthals in as Homo sapiens neanderthalensis as a subspecies, but that was 20 years ago, and it didn't really go anywhere and became utterly moot when we started actually having not only more Neanderthals, including juveniles, to look at in terms of the developmental biology, but also the actual genetics, and whoops, out the window that we're the same species. So too bad. Now, your U-Ross types, that branch in old Earth creationism is able to accept the idea that Neanderthals are not soulish, and so that group wants to isolate Neanderthals from the human group. And there are a little handful of creationists, young Earth creationists, that kind of wiffle waffle on the topic, but it's an interesting little sidebar. Yes, creationists ignore most everything. Yes, although it's fun to see them having their little fistfights. One of the things that's important to remember in dealing with any creationist argument is to remember that there are camps and cliques and niches. So you got the big three, Answers in Genesis, which split also into CMI back in the divorce over Ken Ham. And there's a lot of feedback loop on there, especially on the website, where stuff that is older material will be maybe at the Answers in Genesis website as well as the CMI website. More recent material tends to get ghettoized. And of course, this Sarfati and Tay book is a perfect example of of the big block of creationists material that they're citing in the book. It's a large proportion, it's way over a third. That it's all basically CMI, and a lot of it is also Sarfati himself. So there's a great deal of incestuous insularity. They're not venturing out into Answers in Genesis or ICR or typically the Creation Research Society Quarterly that has a lot of feedback over there. And then, of course, you've got the sidebars that are going around out in the periphery, your Kent Hovins and your Standing for Truths and all the various apologias that are going on video, where it's a free-for-all of what material they're glomming onto. Sometimes a lot of these can kind of masquerade as sort of intelligent designish, but when you start looking at some of the poking around in the details, they may as well be drawing on young Earth creationist material. So it can be murky and fun, but don't presume that any material you see, especially in a video context, from a creationist thing would be representative of the whole field. It's just that doctrinal niche, that's the position they want to present, and that's the pundit they want to present. So back to our cute little pterosaurs. When I went on to Wikipedia just to see where the state of the art was on pterosaur phylogeny, they were noting that it's kind of contested. And so the papers that I alluded to already, and another one that is more recent, Andres and Myers 2012, can kind of dive you into it. Fortunately, whereas the Kellner and Unwin stuff from 2003 are not openly accessed, the Andres and Myers is. So I'll be putting a link up to that, the Lone Star pterosaurs, where they're building off of a very nice sampling of pterosaurs that were dug up in Texas. Ironically, place where there's an awful lot of creationists, but it will allow you to kind of piece together the bit. You can look at the phylogeny that they present, and the background record you discover is one of the reasons why there would have been and still remains some uncertainty in pterosaur paleontology. Is one, an awful lot of the specimens are poorly preserved or fragmentary. So if you just get a nice looking skull of a critter, but nothing else in the body, how do you fit it into the larger systematics? How would you know when you've got all these little variations in that going on? So it's partly that, but there's still an awful lot of taxa involved. And of course, your paleontologists want to make sense out of it all, which can be contrasted with the vacuous air of what doesn't go on at all in the creationist world. Only the cute little ones. What about the one where as tall as giraffes? Yeah. The bigger even than Quetzalcoatlus. A lot of these are just humongous ones that are probably not flyers. Oh, yes, I was going to mention the fact that Kevin Padian, for a while, and this was quite a while ago, I think it's over 20 years ago, flirted with the idea that pterosaurs might have been bipedal. And this landed like a lead balloon as people started looking into more of the details of the thing. So, yeah, they're quadrupedal. And so that means that of the three vertebrate flyers, two of them are basically quadrupedal, bats and pterosaurs, and only the birds are your habitual bipeds. And it's because they evolved from bipedal ancestors. They already had a lot of that kit bag as to balance and internal structure and genetics and all that already running in your active theropods. So the fact that bats betray their quadrupedal heritage the moment they land on the ground, and they're clambering around on all fours naturally. The circumstantial argument is that pterosaurs were also quadrupedal and therefore are coming up from a quadrupedal ancestor, most likely. Now, the murkiness of not only their own paleontology, but also what was going on earlier. There's one of the bones, I think it's called the pterygoid, that's a little like a little sliver that sticks out. That's very distinctive of pterosaurs. And as far as anybody's been able to find, yeah, it's pretty much it's exclusive to them. So how exactly that came about is one of the little ongoing mysteries in settling the details of pterosaur origins, and especially also the ancestors would be very small, lightweight critters, so the odds of having a lot of fossils on the front are very, very dim. If there were living pterosaurs to look at, then you'd be able to look at their developmental biology, and you'd be able to look at their genes, and you could probably infer a lot more about their evolutionary ancestry, because you'd have that information to go on in exactly the way that we have with Neanderthals. So, pterosaur trackways, yes. In fact, that was the bit that kind of helped to sink. Unwin and others were bringing up a lot about the dynamics of how they actually move the trackways. There's not a huge amount of pterosaur trackways, and so there weren't. It wasn't an easy thing to resolve. But yeah, that was part of the reason why the Padian biped model sounded cute for a while, but it didn't quite go over. So I hope you'll be enjoying at least that nice little Andres paper, because it's got an awful lot of material in it, and a lot of the paleontology, and is referencing a lot of the earlier material as well. And then you can cross-reference it against whatever else if you feel obsessed about looking into it. Now, on to our little pals, Luskin. This episode involves NANOG and the games with NANOG. In the middle of the last month, I was reminded of the NANOG gene from a completely different area. It's involved in things like stem cell differentiation. It came up in a discussion that was going on completely independent of creationism. And when I looked in my reference field, I was spotting that I had some stuff on it already. And then it dawned on me, maybe I should check to see, because in a lot of the analysis that I do in working through the Luskin bibliography, is if it's got a specific little gene or detail on there, I'll do a text search to find out if there are other papers that are relating to that. And I've already done that in previous episodes, where I've put in clusters of stuff, or sometimes stuff from the same author, so that you can kind of see their work together. And that's kind of picking stuff off, not entirely in the order that Luskin was doing the thing. So this thing, the NANOG, involves 11 duplicated pseudogenes that are littering our genome. And a check of my references found that I had several works on it. There's Fairbanks and Mon from 2006 that I'll be putting up in the link on the, quote, unusually large, unquote, pseudogene family in humans and chimpanzees. Note that human and chimpanzees angle. And then Golick, Rezimanowska, and Bednarik 2016 on NANOG expressions in cancers. Ooh, that's interesting. In other words, we're smack dab in the theodicy problem. Oh, yeah. So clearly we have the notion that NANOG has a natural origin and evolutionary history, and it snags on the theodicy matter if you're arguing that it was designed. So I was really quite amused to find that 2 NANOG papers show up on the 800 list. One from 2006, which again is an interestingly old paper. Most of the stuff on the Luskin list is really recent, as in just the last couple of years. So whenever anything suddenly pops up that's like vintage, occasionally even into the 20th century, that always intrigues me, is why they're thinking of bringing this little thing up in this vacuum of source material. Anyway, it's a paper by Zhang et al. From 2006 that is available open access, so I'll be putting the link on it. And it's on the part of the pseudogene copies and what they play in generating cancer. So the very topic of this bloody thing is a theodicy issue. And incidentally, curiously enough, it's the one pseudogene copy that is not found over in the chimpanzees. So it's putatively a more recent one in our hominid lineage, which brings up the whole issue. When exactly did they think this was stuck in the genome? And by which God did they have in mind? Is Luskin and company ever going to think through any of this stuff other than just dumping all of this stuff on us in this stupid little list? Because remember, none of the things are annotated. Back in the day, Luskin and others, I didn't know creationists used stuff that recent. Oh, no, there's especially in your paper trawlers. Luskin is one of those. David Kopej is one of those. There's a small clutter of anti-evolutionists who want to be on top of things. And so they're likely to be scavenging through the technical literature, and they probably have a variety of journals in that they're looking at every week or every month if they come out in that thing, in the same way that I look at PNAS and Science and Nature, which are weeklies, to keep up with the technical literature. And so they're trawling for stuff all the time. This stuff will pop up then in some of their apologetics. You get that in ICR, Acts and Facts articles on a variety of topics that are recent papers. But Kopej will do that. I don't pay close attention to Kopej. He's vomitously long. I've got a huge swath of his material on varying issues in my reference field already, but I could drown if I tried to keep up with his current material. Although he's getting older now, that should slow him down a tad. But it's a way that they're trying to co-opt things for the cause. But typically, these examples, if you look at them individually and you then keep track of what the follow-up is, they just drop them and they don't pay any attention to their own material later on. There's relatively little repeat discussion of a particular topic unless they really feel they got one tucked in their reference field well. But the Luskin list and that big chunk of that in the spreadsheet in that I'm doing on it, constructing, I'm keeping track of the chronology of it. And the vast majority of the material on that list is very recent. And in fact, that's part of the selling point that the Luskin list is that it's, wow, this is the new material. They see when these nasty anti-creationists are insisting that junk DNA is not this important thing that we're saying it is, that here's some more recent material that's in there. And so there's very little crossover between the older junk DNA discussions in private material, because all of this stuff is recent. Lying for Jesus. Well, I'm charitable and just calling them Tortukans. That there are people who have tunnel vision and they pay attention to that and they don't pay attention to anything else. Please, by all means, popularize the cute little word because it's a thing. If I describe somebody as a Tortukan, and I think I did a discussion of one of these things a few episodes back, somebody describe, and I can describe them as not aloha and not track. That describes a great deal about that person without you necessarily knowing anything about their specific ideology, whether they're conservative or not, or whether they're religious or not, although an awful lot of theocratic ideologues would fall into that category. So anyway, the other paper that Luskin drew off of is from Gonzalez Rico et al. In 2020, so much more recent than that Zhang paper. And it is on ALU modulating expression of the active gene. And again, that's happening because of something that we've been encountering in a lot of the work in previous episodes, which is how ALUs can bind with itself and create loops and conformational changes in the way that the DNA is structured, or for that matter, disconnect an entire gene that way. That's why we don't have tails, is because of the actions of ALU. So the capacity that ALUs they're very good at, which begs the question of when did this isolated gene come in and how that addition took place. Now, because this is a 2020 paper, this is cutting edge research. They're just looking into this particular aspect. So we can anticipate that in the years to come, they'll probably publish newer material, which, depending upon the matter, may or may not ever get riffed upon by the intelligent design movement or anywhere else. That is a really good question, Nepicross. It has layers of material. And I'll say that amongst the new breed of creationists, the kinds that Joel Duff is paying attention to is what he calls the new creationism. They're younger people, much younger than this old fart, so they're people 40s or earlier. They're really trying their best. And they're still getting into the field. So they're they're the newer names that are popping up at the Answers Research Journal and the Journal of Creation and the old Creation Research Society Quarterly. Not a huge amount of output from them yet. And whether or not it's going to be a huge output over time compared to like the titans of vomiting source citations, your Jerry Bergmans or your Jonathan Sarfatis, Michael Ord, John Woodmarapp. I mean, these are just, whoa, they've been at it for decades. And so they have very, very long material on it. And of course, a lot of the creationist technical work pops up at stuff that's presented in their international creationism conferences, which are not exactly yearly. I think the newer one was in 2023. The one before that was like 2018. So they kind of trickle out all of there. Yes, the YECs have evolved, yes, over time. And so you've got a different dynamic. Another factor that bears enormously on the apologetics that we see, this is way below the technical paper level. This is the stuff that you're seeing in the videos, relates to whether or not you're interacting with somebody that's Kent Hovind fossil, that they're riffing off of really old material without occasional exceptions, like riffing off of Harun Yahya. But most of it's stuff from the Walt Brown era from the 1980s. And he does not show signs of improving with age. Your newer generation types, like Standing for Truth, are riffing off of newer material that's published in their creationist journals. And so they're riffing off of Sanford and Tompkins and Jensen and that crowd, slavishly. And they're doing their best to reflect this stuff. Now, an awful lot of that creationist output is repetitive drivel. It's rehashing the same talking points over and over and over and over again. And you can get some very lengthy papers with a lot of source citations, and relatively little of it is reflecting newer material. I'm less interested, frankly, in the creationists' incestuous citation of themselves than I am in the technical matter of measuring the creationist interaction with the regular scientific field, to both measure how much of the stuff are they bumping into, and also how are they representing or misrepresenting it. I wonder what creationist material is clogging the author. Do new generation creationists have that much reach? I think, there's Eric Hovind, I think, has a whole little website search tool that's like their version of Google to look for creationist material, but it'll simply pop up stuff that's in that relatively small network of stuff. Remember, you've only got, as creationist technical journals, the old Creation Research Society Quarterly. I think there's a British Origins magazine, and then which I think is still kind of active. I haven't checked lately, though. And then there's an Adventist version of that. So they both have the same name, Origins. These are kind of semi-technical stuff. You've got the big guns really are the Journal of Creation, which is AIG arm, and then their own Answers Research Journal thing. So it's that side. ICR is kind of degenerated into basically Acts and Facts, is where they're presenting a lot of their stuff, but they have many of their authors will be publishing in the Journal of Creation, and they'll be alluding to that on occasion. Wish Claudia Albers did creationism. Oh, yes. Claudia Albers, isn't she the strange little lady that's behind a black screen and doing long videos and that? If the name rings a vague bell, or she had a partner. They were doing some kind of weird with those stuff about the giants, and it's been a few years. I think it popped up on some of the things we did on Sci Strike's old channel, and see that the video angle. These are the sorts of people that live and die just on the video, and they write nothing down. They don't document anything. It's just the presentation. So there's a constant surging back and forth between those relatively small things. Oh, and I will mention the one intelligent design journal, which is at death's door in terms of the significance of it, biocomplexity. The intelligent design movement has gone through several different iterations of little magazines that they do over the years, and biocomplexity is the most recent. But it's a small field. Now, by comparison, the regular scientific field, I have in my own reference of familiarity, there's 2,000 some odd journals. So there's a lot going on. And so however much the creationists are putting out in their own in-house articles of where, if they are coming out monthly, in the case of Journal of Creation, you've got they're like 30, 40, they can go longer than that, 100 pages or so. And so there can be a dozen articles in there, and there will be letters to the editor and things back and forth on it. But an awful lot of it is churning the same arguments. Michael Ord, Hartnett in Cosmology Matters, there's an awful lot of retread going on. So, and that some of that material, what I'm intrigued because I'm on CMI's mailing list, I get their little things that say the stuff they want you to pay attention to. And so it's a mix, largely older Creation magazine articles, which they got custody of during the divorce back in 2006. So they recycle a lot of that material. And it always intrigues me why they're highlighting an older piece. And it's often regurgitating theological material. Some of their longest posts and articles are theologically based, where they're going on and on about some bit about Adam's sinning and its relation to redemption. That will be longer than the stuff that they will be putting out on technical topics. So it's fascinating. It's again, that's a mixed structure. It depends on the topic. What I do notice, and we're going to be discussing it in great detail in Rocks 2, are the favored tropes. One of the ginormous tropes of crossing virtually all of young Earth creationism is the soft tissue thing. And it gets a broad range, both in their technical arguments and in their video presentations across the board. None of that, with one weird exception, trespasses in the intelligent design camp. The one weird counterexample, which is telling you something about his brain, is James Tour, who has flirted, caused Dan Stern Cardinale's jaw to drop when he found out about that, and Joel Duff in that too. They're going, what? And that gives you some sense about the kind of worldview that's circulating around at that edge. But it's very much a young Earth creationist field. The other thing that's important to bring out, is the Planet X researcher. Yes, I remember. Oh, yeah. Holy moly. Yeah, it's the one that, and of course, we got the thing about, there was another weird, I think I'm confusing her with the lady that would watch how much of what she's saying is real, what she believed or not, but she would like see a movie poster of invaders from Mars or something, and she would think that's a documentary and science material, and she would riff off of that. It's very strange. Yeah. Oh yeah. You should be the soft tissue issue. Isn't that alliterative? Is heavily based on Brian Thomas at ICR. He is just relentless on it, and his posts then get metastasized and copied out in the field. So it's very rare to find a creationist who is not either riffing directly off of Thomas or riffing off of somebody who's copying Thomas, or riffing off of somebody who's copying somebody who's riffing off of Thomas, in these tendrils and daisy chains and that's going on. And so we're breaking a lot of that material down, and providing a nice discussion of the various technical material and why it's not a refutation of evolution, but it is a reveal about the data suppression angle. The one thing that pops up by anybody that studies how creationists cover the matter is how reluctant they are, either because they don't know it themselves or they don't want you to know it, is how microscopically small the samples are. That they're not like, let's see, the Iceman, that where you've got beautiful detailed mummy with organs and stuff in there, which you would think would be possible if the Earth were all that young. Yeah, Schweitzer is tired of it too. Yes, we allude to the interview that she gave with Paula Gia, where she was going on about discussing how she was being misrepresented on the matter. And so you have to remember that I would hazard that most of the creationists bringing up the soft tissue thing have never got within a mile of the primary source literature. So their notions about what Schweitzer thinks is entirely repetition of the churning lore that goes along in Acts and Facts and in Answers in Genesis Creation and in the various things that get done, a lot of it on video. And of course, you've got the little sidebar pimple of Mark Armitage that we're going to be discussing in there in his eccentric papers, and the worm Armitage to try to publish in journals that had serious peer review. He's popped up in peripheral things relating to his field of microscopy, and they're venturing into paleontological subjects, and yet all the details about where the hell you dug this up and scales of things and how did you ascertain what species this was, what critter it was, is a thing that there's no methods material in those papers. And so it's a matter that hopefully the ROX 2 discussion of all the ins and outs of the soft tissue thing will be a useful compendium that people will be able to draw upon, as well as for a lot of other little subjects. So we've had a little bit of fun on that. Ooh, we've already gone down to 41 minutes. I better let me put up my thank you for all of our wonderful patrons who have patroned all over the years. I again remind everybody to be careful about the upcoming economic doom. And if it's the matter that it's a course between the discretionary fling of helping the project, as much as I value and need the resources that come in from my end, make sure to keep your own powder dry during this period, because we are going to be in for a very, very, very messy little thing. On where I'm at on the new rocks, I'm knee deep in the cosmology chapter. I've always had a certain amount of trepidation for it because I'm not a physicist, but I am a source methods person. And so I'm able to coordinate stuff. Anybody that has volume 1 will know how much I love charts. And so we had a lot of charts that coordinate things like listing all of the feathered theropods that are known chronologically and with the technical papers, so everybody can follow up on it. That affect Patreon. It's not USA. I have a bunch of people who are not in the United States who support the project. Ian Chan and the like. Paulie G is from Canada. He's a patron of the project, and that's so. And I put the link in, shameless plug, every single episode, as well as the links to all the books, both the science stuff and the novels, which I, spoiler alert, I think I write some nice stories. And busy with the third Paralogs novel, and also Paralogs, or the Rocks Were There Volume 2. The cosmology chapter is one that I had a lot of material on and have gotten sorted out, and I've got structured rather nicely. There's going to be a really nice little summary chart of Big Bang chronology, which will be breaking things down by how big the universe was at a particular point, what the electron energy is, what the number of Planck time ticks, and all the rest, and also ways of letting people have a visceral sense of how much of the early phases of the Big Bang are really fast. And so an enormous amount of stuff had gone on in the Big Bang before we even get down to the first jiffy, which is 10 to the minus 43rd seconds. And then down to the first second, an awful lot of stuff has happened by then. This is before we're even getting into like inflation and that material. And so then things start slowing down and varying as we're moving into the inflationary phase. And then we've got that stuff from the Dark Ages and the like. But the kinds of stuff that we're seeing with the COBE information, and also with Hubble and now the James Webb Telescope, are all way late in the game. You know, we're talking about hundreds of millions of years after the actual Big Bang. So we're seeing a baby picture, but not the embryonic stage, which took place at much greater speed and just before that. So yeah, it affects people's ability. Tariffs. Oh yeah, the tariffs affect Patreon. Yeah. Well, it's. I don't think it'll be affecting it much. They've got kind of their own little independent thing. Another reason why Dapper Dino and others like Patreon is they take a smaller cut. And whereas there was always awkward problems running with the old GoFundMe thing that I had, which is now functionally defunct, it glitched up, and I've never bothered to try to start up a new one. Everything is running through the Patreon. And believe me, it makes a difference every month, because I've got Social Security and my Patreon, and then we've got the occasional book royalties. And that's enough to squeak by. I do envy people like Elon Musk or Donald Trump who are rolling in dough, ill-gotten gains, and the ability to cheat and connive and fraud their way to vast fortunes. Although there's going to be some schadenfreude, because holy smokes, a lot of their money can just vaporize in the dust in a major stock market crash. Lunch dumping Musk to Mars. Oh, yes, I'm hoping that. Remember, Trump is in one of his blither blather modes, and remember, whatever Trump says is not always going to actually happen. But he's really keen to have Musk land on Mars in his term. So that means before 2028. And that's really pushing the envelope to the point of potential danger. But if they're going to do some stupid Mars expedition rushed ahead, I want Mr. Musk aboard. Can his ego avoid wanting to be on that first flight so that he can put the little flag on Mars as the Martian conqueror? And will he actually end up getting there if they have just one bolt fall apart, like, you know, a Boeing spaceship, what things can go? And so interesting times. We'll be thinking about that. Anyway, so the cosmology stuff, there's going to be an awful lot that we'll be covering in that chapter on cosmic background radiation and the dark matter, dark energy, the development of solar systems, galactic structures, relationships of that to black holes, gravitational lensing, and plus besides all the science by the creationist movement. Reconnecting. The little clock is still running, so there may be a little audio glitch there. I think there's only about 2 transfer windows before then. Yeah, home and transfer orbits make it very awkward and slow to get to distant planets that way. We don't have acceleration platforms. You could get to Mars in 2 days if we had a thermonuclear spaceship, but we don't have those yet. So there we go. And we've already had 2 plane crashes. Yeah, and we're only like 10, 15 days into the Trump administration. So, isn't this exciting? I was going to give Trump a whole year before a lot of shit was hitting the fan, but they're kind of accelerating the process. And they're going to be just drowning in lawsuits from the various people they're firing. that there's legal elements going on. Some of the stuff is blatantly unconstitutional. Is his impounding of funds? Nixon tried to do it, and it was unconstitutional then, and they even passed a law that reminded people that you can't do that. And of course, the birthright citizenship stuff is blatantly unconstitutional. In part, it's that weapons of mass distraction thing that the Midas touch people like to allude to. Is Trump he thrives on chaos. So if he goes and you're so busy paying attention to all the that he can then go back to his golf game and somebody else is doing the Project 2025 stuff because he signed the report that did it. And so he's as tyrants go, he's a pathetic and lazy one. And so in some respects, one of the saving possible graces of Trump 2.0 is that he's incredibly stupid and mentally deteriorating and incompetent. And so a lot of the crap won't actually end up being done. So it's going to be a really exciting and wacky little time that we have in the line. And I said, I'm anxious to see what the hell the stock market does on Monday because there's a lot of reason for them to be very, very concerned. And there's going to be an awful lot of red states that's going to be screwed. I mean, the Canadians are fully prepared to pull the plug on their electric grid sales to the states on the other side of the border that includes some red states that people could be running low on electricity that way. Plus, there are 20% of our crude oil or more comes from Canada. The lumber that we use to build the houses and all that with. I mean, it's just a vast interlocking network of trade. Washington State has a great connection on that stuff. Our Washington State products go down. Washington wines are sold to Mexico and all of that. So, I mean, it's got a mess of things. So, yes, it's just a Gish Gallop. Yes. And that Gish Gallop aspect is more than literal, because or genuinely literal, because the mindset of your average Trumpista is methodologically indistinguishable from the mindset of a creationist. Sometimes they literally are creationists, but even the ones that are not overtly creationists, they don't necessarily buy into dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, but they follow the same Tortugan methodology. They rely on secondary sources, if any, that they don't bother to fact check. They know some tropes, but they don't really go beyond that. One bad method to rule them all is the little mantra that I put up. Canada is targeting the red states, yes, and Tesla. 100% tariff are going to stick on the Tesla. So it's going to be messy. The one hope, although we've got Erdogan and other right-wing nutballs that are in the European Union, there's an awful lot of fairly reasonable people there, hopefully, and that the hope will be that there will be insulation so that our economic mess doesn't radiate out as badly as it did in the 1930s, that helped bring the whole planet into a depression and help grease the skids for World War II. That's bad. We don't want to do that, kids. So, and whether or not Trump actually goes full bore and tries to invade Greenland or go after Panama, I mean, this could have regional things. There would be just hell to pay in Central America if they try to pull a stunt like that. So it's going to be an interesting time. My mantra is, don't blame me. I voted for Harris. None of this is my fault. I didn't contribute to this catastrophe. And we will be curious to see how many Trumpistas who were aware that Trump was a lying nitwit, but went ahead because of like eggs. Now, eggs prices are going up. That a lot of buyer's remorse have come along on that. Now, whether that can translate into some genuine political shifts, where we still will have like a midterm coming up in 26 and other matters, and then continue to have elections that way. Can they try to steal their way around it? They will try to. There's a congressman who's trying to put in an amendment to allow Trump to serve for a third term. Odds of that happening through the states are absolutely unlikely. A few states might favor it that are crazy train, but again, time is running out for their goodwill because there will, if conditions become bad enough, even the most diehard Trumpista is going to be facing unemployment and food shortages and asking the God King Emperor Donald the Infallible to wave his magic wand and make it all better. And the man is not going to be able to do anything to make anything better. He'll just invariably make it worse. So, and I would agree, as it's them with Canada, that whether we would like to make, in fact, some have joked that we could make Washington, Oregon, and Canada provinces of British Columbia, of Canada, and join up with them, which would cut the entire United States off from its Pacific seaports. But that would be a little sidebar on that. I'd rather we continue in a different way. But it's a horrible experiment that we're going through. And we need also to have a fundamental transformation in our educational system and how our media operate, to where we've got to instill more sound methods in people, because otherwise we're going to be facing Trump or some other counterpart of that for the next 20 or 30 years. It'll be lurching from one nutball to another because nobody knows how to source check anything. This is not rocket science, and we cannot afford Tortugan people in public office. They're dangerous. They're going to run off the rails. And it doesn't matter if they're Trumpista conservatives or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Ex-liberals. It's bad, bad, bad all the way around. So anyway, let me put my little commercial up for Rocks for There. We are actually got looks like a pretty good hour out of the way on this. Waiting for my little thing to whoops. And up there, and put on my share screen. Beep, beep, beep. And there's our advert. We are very proud of Volume 1, and we'll be equally proud, if not more so, for Volume 2. I've been learning more and more little techniques on things and modalities of how to approach topics, and the delightful learning experience. There's so much science out there that the idea that you could tackle a subject like this and not present a really informative array, well, you'd have to be lazy to do that. And neither Jackson and I are, if many things, but lazy is not one of them. We are diligent, we're curious, and we want to play fair with the facts. We don't want to ever misrepresent the views of any creationists, and we don't want to pretend that when they're saying claptrap that they're not saying claptrap. And we will document it with rigor and wit. And that is all I can say on that little subject. Oh, yeah. Well, there'll be a tremendous, yes, the Seven Mountains thing. Yes, that's part of that. Vance, or I think Lance or whatever, Lance Wallnow, that bunch, and the extremist theocrats that are circulating. How much of that actually bumps into the Trump administration is hard to say, because Trump is a pretend Christian. He's a prosperity gospel limo church guy, and that's the extent of it. He's not actually a religious believer. Mike Pence, at least, was a believer. Trump is a pretend. Whether or not Vance and some of these others are actually all that religious is hard to say. I suspect that Speaker Johnson is quite religious. I suspect that Marjorie Taylor Greene is quite religious, although it's hard to imagine just what exactly is knocking around in that head of hers to do that. As for the blaming Obama thing, they'll blame whatever they want to. The other thing that's quite clear about Trump, of course, is that his brain is cycling around an ever smaller set of obsessions. So, and he's abetted by this in Congress. So Comer and the like and that bunch, they'll be conducting their hearing of the month club on Hunter Biden's laptop, and they'll try to rake over the coals all the people who are doing the January 6th investigation. And there's going to be a bunch of lawsuits, and they've already avoided calling some of the January 6th witnesses because there's potential blow up in terms of sex scandals that might come out if everybody started blowing the whistles on it. So it's the old scale of corruption that you would have seen in the Harding administration and in elements of some of the other administrations where you had a mixed bag. You had corruption in the Grant administration, but Grant personally was not a corrupt person. But the Trump administration is shooting off the scales in terms of both corruption and arrogance and vituperative, blow everything up extremism. And it's going to make a mess for a while. Hopefully, one which we can survive so that our enemies do not exploit our brief moment of yagada, yagada, yagada. It's going to be interesting to see one way or the other. Um, well, yes, I don't make any presumptions about whether or not Trump is going to. He's got the constitution of a horse. I think it's just his evil little body just refuses to give up. But the brain is clearly deteriorating, and he could hang on for another decade or more. Not at all unfeasible, but in one condition, and what condition is the country being left in? So it's going to be, yes, it's all the worst aspect. Tammany Hall at least knew how to deliver something for widows and orphans. I mean, they had a network of graft that actually helped some people at the local level, but the oligarchs up there are dispensing with that. They're in let them eat cake mode, of where they're looking at how wealthy they're getting, and they're doing all of these extreme positions where, and of course Trump is stuck. He can never change his mind. So it's highly likely that these beautiful tariffs, he loves that little word, he's going to be dumping all of this crap on things, even though we have a long track record of knowing what a bad idea all of this stuff is. It's neither God nor the devil wants him. Yeah. And the one thing, absolutely, when Trump does die, I want it that he's not on display in the Capitol. He will have dishonored the Republic vastly too much to warrant that. And also, whether or not anybody will fork out money to build the Trump library, and what in God's name would you put in it, or whether or not it will be burned to the ground by rioting, angry people, if anybody tries to do it. So it's a hard sell on a lot of these things. Anyway, going to be an interesting time. We had an actual evolution hour now this time. Keep an eye out for your dangerous penguins that are armed with space lasers guarding the flat Earth wall. And we will all see you kids hopefully next week with another episode on another installment of the Pterosaurs of Sarfati and Tay. See you all next week, kids.